we are halfway through our identity series, and we've been looking at how our identity is founded in God, and we can find it in Scripture. We started week 1, and we found that we were all formed in God's image, and so our identity has a baseline, and we can go back to that. And then the second week, we said, even when our identity is formed in the image of God, more than that, we're filled with His Spirit. And I have heard, I got to tell you, some amazing testimonies over the last couple of weeks about what happened in that service when we talked about talked about the life-giving opportunity that we would be filled by His Spirit, and we talked about the names that we have been calling ourselves and the name that the Holy Spirit has for us. I got to tell you, I've been blown away by what God has been doing in the lives of our church family. And then last week, we were talking about not only are we formed and filled, we're also forgiven of all things. And it doesn't matter what we do, whether right or wrong, we are just forgiven because of what Christ has done, because of our belief in Him. Because if we choose to find our identity with Him, we're made perfect. And there were dozens of people that said, "That's me, I want to do that," last week. Like, this has been an unbelievable last couple of weeks of what God is doing, saying, I was having suicidal thoughts. I was having thoughts that I was a failure. I'm not that person anymore. People saying, you know what, I never believed in Jesus, but after that presentation last week, I'm going to be a follower. This is unbelievable what God is doing in our midst. Yeah, for sure. We can say thank you, Jesus. So why then does it matter how we live? Why are Christians all hung up on lifestyles and habits as fundamentally good or fundamentally bad? If every human being is formed in His image, regardless of what they believe or how they live, if we can be filled with His Spirit, and if it's all about what Christ does for us, nothing what we do for ourselves, what does it matter? Paul finishes Colossians chapter 2 saying there's even people with the mindset, and they're like, we're more spiritual than you are. You know why? Because we fast, and because we don't eat this and don't drink this, and you do. So you're not as spiritual as we are. And there were people that were denying themselves of certain lifestyle habits, and they were like, we're more spiritual. And you know what Paul does in Colossians 2? If you've been reading along with us, we didn't get to it in a sermon series Sunday, but Paul says, you're not. You're just not more spiritual because you do or you don't do certain things. That's not the way it is. But biblical math is binary. You are spiritual. Why? Because you have stepped into new life with Christ. And if you have not stepped into new life with Christ, then you're living in death. It's binary, one or the other. You cannot be more spiritual. You cannot be more Christian. You are or you're not. And he goes, guys, you got to stop looking at each other and saying, I'm better than you and I'm better than that. Stop it. That's not the new life you've been called to. That's Colossians 2. So again, here's the question. What's the big deal? Why do we make up all these rules and why do we try to enforce them? Aren't we alienating significant groups of people who would like to identify with Christ, yet also want to identify with something in this world that gives them meaning and purpose? If a person recognizes I've been formed in His image, filled with His Spirit, forgiven of all things, why does it matter if I identify with another group of people? Well, that's today. Because we have been formed, we have been filled, we have been forgiven. We are also freed to live by a new design, which is our thought for today. You and I have been made free to live in a new design. And let's jump into Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. If you want to follow along this morning, all of my notes and thoughts are going to be in the app. So just get into the app. You click on sermon notes. There's a new step now. You got to click on the series. So click on identity. You're going to see all of the notes from the last 4 weeks. So just make sure you click on the June 2nd notes. And let's jump in and look at how are we freed to live as we're designed. Well, number one, we got to focus our minds on our new reality. One of the challenges some people who are trying to follow Jesus have is that we read a part of Scripture and we're like, ha, I got it. So if I'm freed, if I'm forgiven of all things and it doesn't matter, then that's where I'm just going to camp out. But there are many people who are trying to follow Jesus and they're wrestling with this thought, how come I can't be fulfilled in my faith and fulfilled in this thing on earth that gives me meaning and purpose? And that is an honest question. I want to be a follower of Jesus, but I also want to identify with this. Honest question. But fundamentally, what we're going to see, it's a bad perspective. It's a starting place. And if you're just new to this journey of faith, I'm going to 100% believe you're going to be there. You're like, well, yeah, I'm a Christian now, but I'm also, how else would you label yourself? I'm a Christian, but I'm a this Christian, or I'm a this Christian, or I'm a this Christian. Let me show you why it's a fundamentally bad starting place. If I choose to identify myself, who is Lord of my life? Jesus. No, if I'm identifying myself, me, I am. If I say, I want God, I want you, but I also want this, who's in charge? Me. So the challenge is, do we say, Lord, I like what you've done, and I'm going to identify there, but I also like what I've done. So I'm going to identify with my feet in both worlds. It's not a bad question to start from, and it's the place where every one of us who have ever said, I want to be a follower of Jesus, we're all there. We've all been there. The challenge is we allow it to persist. And what happens is we cease to be in the freedom that Christ has won for us, and we start to be pulled back into the place that we want to win for ourselves. So let's look at Colossians 3. Let's put verses 1 to 3 on the screen. It says, since you have been raised to new life with Christ, so everything we talked about last week, since Christ did all this, set your sights on the reality of heaven, where Christ sits in the place of honor at God's right hand. Think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth. For you died to this life, and your real life is hidden with Christ in God. Just leave that on screen for a minute. I want to pull out a couple of statements. The realities of heaven. So since God did this, look at the reality of heaven. What is heaven? Heaven is the dwelling place of God. It is the place of perfection where he is perfect and where he is welcoming us to step in, where we too are without sin, where we too are without faults. It's the place where we go, and I don't need to worry about my identity. I don't have to work. I don't have to strive. I don't have to stress, because my identity is in him alone. And many of the broken places of our identity, the places where we go, my identity is hurting and I want it to be fulfilled with this earthly thing, it's because we're missing something in our lives. We're like, I want this. I want this piece to be added into my life, and I want this piece to be part of my identity. So what does Paul say? If you're part of the new life, get off of this and fix your eyes on the reality of heaven, where Christ sits. Where I am not fulfilled because of my relationship, where I am not fulfilled because of my success, where I am not fulfilled because of my upbringing, my family, my orientation, my whatever it is that is critical to your identity. What is it for you? You would go, this is the piece of Rick on earth that is part of my identity that's really important. He says, set your sights on the reality of heaven, where you are just Rick, child of God, made perfect, not needing to strive, not needing to work, loved, cared for, redeemed, chosen, forgiven. That's where you set your sights. And God desires and designed us to be fulfilled completely and defined completely in the reality of heaven. So as long as this is a battle, of I want to be Rick, chosen, forgiven, loved, and I want to be Rick who is fulfilled on earth, I've not set my sight on heaven. I've kept my sights on earth with a little bit of heaven dashed in. So what does Paul say? Have you really done this? You know what you've done? You've died to this life. So that means your life is now hidden with Christ in heaven. So fix your eyes there. So let's move to our second thought, that if we set our sights on the reality of heaven, what do we have to do? We have to take an active role in stepping into the new reality. The challenge that I think a lot of people get to is that they have a mindset, they go, you know what, if I've received Jesus, if I've believed, then supernaturally all of my desires will eventually just go away. All of the things that I want to identify with on earth it'll just start to fade away. And I won't have to work at it. If I believe hard enough, if I want it bad enough, if I pray long enough, God, my full attention will be focused on heaven. Can I show you something here in Colossians? Paul doesn't describe it this way. He doesn't describe that if you just work harder, you'll get more and more like Jesus. And he definitely doesn't say if you just earn your own righteousness, you're going to become more and more righteous. He uses language, though, that we are participants. So let's put these 6 verses on the screen, and then I'm going to highlight some things. So starting at verse 5, he goes, so put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. He's acknowledging, follower of Jesus, been made new. There's stuff that's within us. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires. Don't be greedy. Greedy person is an idolater, worshiping things of the world. He goes, because of these sins, the anger of God is coming. You used to do these things when your life was still part of this world. Let's go to the next slide. But now's the time to get rid of anger and rage, malicious behavior, slander, dirty language. Don't lie to each other, for you've stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. Now, I could spend an hour on this, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things. Let me call out some action words here. So Christ has done all the work for us. We talked about this last week, right? Let's go back to the beginning. Put to death sinful earthly-looking things. Whose job is that? I thought Christ did it all. It's mine. I have to take an active role to put things to death. So as Christ does it, then he says, Rick, there's stuff in here you put to death. Let's fast forward a little bit over to the next one. What does it say? It says, you used to do these things, Rick, when your life was part of when you were trying to identify as something on earth, you did these things. But that he says, now is the time to what? You got to get rid of it. When you're angry, you got to get rid of it. You got to get rid of the malicious behavior. You got to get rid of the stuff you talk about to other people, the slander. That's not of you, Rick, but you get rid of it. Not I will get rid of it for you. You get rid of it. Let's go to the last one, because this is the one that just changes it all. He says, put on, again, whose job is that? That's mine, right? Put on your new nature, and how do you do it? This is where we miss it, because some of you are like, finally, we're going to talk about we have to live righteously, we have to live holy. How do you do it? As you learn to know you're going to be renewed. How? As you learn to know your Creator. You know what the difference is, and why we mess this up? Because I would bet that most people go, if they're going to be a follower of God, they go, well, I would like to live a godly life then. If I'm going to be a follower of God, I should live a godly life. Like Paul, I beat my body, I discipline. Yeah, you do all that. But you know what happens? Then we end up walking into a life of guilt and shame and success and failure. And we're like, I just can't do it because there's stuff that's still within it. So Paul says, let me share with you how you're going to do it. How are you going to do it? You're going to get to know God more. As you learn to know your Creator, you're going to be renewed. And you're going to become like Him. So it's not just discipline, angry at yourself, guilt other people, shame other people. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here too. He says, get to know God. So then what comes out will start to begin, will start to be the thing that renews you. It's not what comes into a person that makes him holy. It's what comes out of a person. It's what's happening within our heart. How many times have you heard the argument, or you made the argument, well, that's just part of who I am. I'm just angry. I'm just a driven person, and so that makes me greedy sometimes. I'm just a passionate person, so that just makes me snap at sometimes. I'm just a passionate person, so you know what? Yeah, I'm lustful at times, and I objectify women, but that's just part of who I am. You've heard these arguments before, right? And you know what Paul goes? He goes, you're right, people. That was who you were, and then you died to that life. And he said that was when you were part of the world. Now he says, these are things that were formed in our culture. These are things that are formed in our world. These are things that are formed because of sin. And I don't change my behavior to make God accept me. God accepts me. And as I get to know how much He loves me, I begin to be formed like who he is. Dave Graham sent me, I don't know if Dave's here, he wasn't in the first service, but he sent me this video this week and I absolutely loved it. It was a theologian and he was lecturing at Harvard, and he said, the problem is that we look at our faith in the same way we look at school, and it's like entrance exams, and it's like marks at the end of a course, that we go, we have to do all these things, and at the end of the time, we are measured whether we can get into school, and we are measured whether we're successful in this course. And he said, but our relationship with God is not a course, it's a love relationship. He loved us. He goes, I met my wife when I was at school. And he said, could you imagine if what I went to her with is said, listen, I love you, so here's a list of ways that you can love me, and in 70 years, I will come back and say, if you loved me well enough that I would accept you to be loved by me. Isn't that a romantic way to start a relationship? Follow all these rules, and then we'll be in a great, loving relationship. He went, no, I actually freaked her out because I told her way too early, I love you. And then they begin to live a life that became unified and lived in a way that was loving. That's what following Jesus is. That's where our life changes, where we understand I am loved, so then my life begins to change from the inside out. Paul said, I'm reading Colossians. I've read it about 12 to 15 times. I've been listening to it, reading it, trying to take it in different ways. And one of the things stood out to me as I was out on a walk. When you get to the end of Colossians, Paul says, I want you to pass this letter on to the church at Laodicea. They need to read this as well. Does that name Laodicea ring a bell for anybody? Have you heard that name before, Church of Laodicea? It's in the book of Revelation. And it's in Revelation, it says that there was a church that would be spit out of the mouth of God because they were neither hot or they were neither cold. And it's a fascinating passage. Lots of people have debated on it. Like, does God really want people to be cold and against him? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So if some historians and theologians have gone, there's a much better understanding of this. And there's a relationship between the church at Colossae and the church at Laodicea. So we see where Colossae is. It's right on the river, right? So Colossae would have had fresh water that they could have drank. They could have got water out of the river. It would have been moving. It would have been cold. It would have been refreshing. That water is really good for their soul. So it knew what it was. It had a definite purpose. It was not in both worlds. It was cold, refreshing water for drinking. And then right connected to Laodicea, just up is a city called Hierapolis, and you can't see it because the red dot's there. But it's up in the mountains. And up in the mountains, there was hot springs at Hierapolis. How many of you have ever been to a hot spring and you sit in one of those bubbling, you sit in the bubbling water and there's minerals and it's cleansing for you. And so hot water is not, it's not in that murky middle. Hot water is perfect for a bath. Cold water is perfect for a drink. But lukewarm water, which is what Laodicea existed on. They're not on the river, so the water had to come from an aqueduct. They're not up on the mountain. There's not hot water. It was kind of in that middle of both. And they knew the people at Hierapolis had good water, and they knew the people at Colossae had good water. And they were like, we get stuff that has been floating along a Roman aqueduct for miles and miles, and when we get it, we can't drink it. We have to boil it, or we have to find a way to cool it. And it was be one or the other. But be all in. Don't be in both. And Paul says, when he writes this letter to the Colossians, who were evidently struggling with being both, he's saying, you need to pass this off to the Laodicean church because they're right there. And they're living the same life you are. They're trying to go, I want to be identified by the world, but I also want to be identified by God. It's not the life to live. And what does the Spirit say in Revelation? The Spirit says, if we live this life that's actually in both worlds, it goes, I can live on to things, I can hold on to anger and greed and slander and sexual desire and still be a follower of Jesus. I'm actually spit out of the mouth of God. Wow. So I don't guilt myself into it. I recognize I got to get closer to Jesus. So how do we do that? Because if I was to examine my heart, if I was to be like David and say, know my thoughts and know my heart, you know what I would be honest? I would say, there's still some stuff that is not that is not good. There's still some stuff that is self-serving, that is wrong motive, that mistreats others. What do I do? Well, our landing point is where Paul brings us, is that we have to learn how to walk this new life in community. Now, here comes my motivational talk for the day. I'm going to be a good motivational speaker today. I'm going to step out of the pastor role, okay? So I'm going to get you all fired up. Ready? Lean in, lean in, lean in. You can't do it. You fired up? Don't invite me to the next conference. You can't do it. God does it for us first. And then secondly, he does not expect you to do this alone. He did not imagine that you can walk this new life by yourself. He said, you have a community. I can't do it alone. I have a friend that I share everything with, absolutely everything with. I have 4 people in my life that I am completely open, honest, and vulnerable with, and only 4. We are a church of thousands, and I have 4. And it is, you can't do it. We are a church that meets, but we need to figure out community in a different way. And that's why we talk about small group, and that's why we talk about serving, because if you don't figure this out, we're going to be doing this alone. We're going to be thousands of people walking alone. We're not going to do it. I have a friend that I share just about everything with, and I shared a text this week with him, and I told him, I go, man, I am not doing well. And this is at the end of multiple weeks we've been talking about, I'm not doing well. I want to share with you what he came back with me, and it's just a beautiful, what he said to me. He goes, thank you for sharing, and I want to remind you, you never need to be on point with me, and you never need to be my pastor. I just need you to be my friend. And so I'm definitely praying. And then he shared how I could pray with him. And I got to tell you what a freeing moment it was to be able to text somebody and go, here's what's really broken in my heart and my life this week. And for him to just come back and go, yeah, I get that, Rick, and thank you for being open and honest with me. Thank you for that. Paul goes on to say, you got to live this life in connection to others, because there are going to be moments when your strength is not enough and you got to rely on somebody else. Look what he says in Colossians 3:12-15. Sorry, bumped my mic. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience, making allowance for each other's faults. Our pastors, we wrestled with this week, and I'm telling you, it was a raw moment. I asked our pastors to go, are you treating each other? Am I treating you with mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience? Are we making allowance for each other's faults? Because we have them. And the moment we start looking at each other and go, well, you shouldn't have a fault, we step into religion. We don't step into this new life Christ has for us. Forgive anyone who offends you. Remember that the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Keep going. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us together in perfect harmony. And then let the peace that comes from Christ rule your hearts. For members of one body, you are called to live in peace. This community of faith, this new life that we've been given, should be the easiest place on earth to expose the parts of our lives that are not yet renewed, the hurting, the broken, the pieces that fall short. And in fact, I would say if every one of us actually did our work and clothed ourselves with mercy and with kindness and humility, and we were gentle with each other, and we were patient with each other, we get caught up on gossiping on people's shortcomings. We get caught up on going, well, this is more holy. You know what we do? We destroy the life that God wants for us. Do you know why 12-step programs are so effective for people sharing what they're going through? Because everybody walks in and looks at each other and goes, hi, I'm broken. can we talk about how I'm broken, you're broken, and we're going to figure this out together? You know what happens in churches? We walk in and we go, I'm good. There's a little piece of me that's not good, but I'm good. Are you good? Good, you're good. We are lying to each other. We are lying to each other. This community was designed to be a place where there is a way to live. That the only thing that would define us is Christ in heaven and his perfect work that has been completed. And yet we live on earth. And in the not yet, there are things that need to be put to death in all of us. So hi, I'm Rick. I'm not good. There's things that exist in me that I've been in recovery for 20 years. That God is working on me. And my invitation is you follow me as I follow Christ. That's what Paul said. And I am the chief of sinners. What's unique to Christianity is that this work is not outward in, it's inward out. And it's exposing the deepest garbage that enslaves us. And we get it out. And it's painful, and it's hard. And you were not designed to be strong enough to do it on your own. You were designed to be in community. Before I took this role here as pastor, our elders asked me to do some time in prayer and to go away. I went to a group of people. These are people that I'd spent years with. We'd served in youth together, at church together. We had cried over our kids together. We had failed in front of each other. We had succeeded with each other. We had formed identity together. And I said, guys, if I'm gonna be in any place of leadership, my goodness, I need a space where I can look at you and go, I'm not good. I'm just Rick, I'm not pastor. I need you. I committed to being fully known and vulnerable, to walk in mercy and kindness. And we made a commitment to do that. And I would say 90% of the time they do that. The other 10% of the time they make fun of me because I'm too touchy-feely. But I can trust them because they love me. And when they look at me and they say, you gotta change, that's not right. You know what? I can go, ouch, and okay, because wounds from a friend can be trusted. And when they look at me and go, when I share something that I'm broken, and they go, yeah, I'll pray with you, I know it's just staying in that group. We're growing together in our identity and what it means to follow Christ. Christ has made me perfect, and as I walk in these places where I still want to identify on earth, we're learning to walk in that identity. That is the new life we are called to as a church. It is not a new life that shames people or guilts people. It says, can we just be open with each other that we have to walk this and we have to be formed, and there's something beautiful that is going to be made, and when we get to heaven, it's going to be good. But we got to walk it. We got to make allowance for each other's faults, and we got to be kind and gentle and tender. And we got to put to death together all of these things as Christ renews us as we learn to know him.